Good morning. I'm Rebecca Snyder with the Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association, and I am delighted to have you here at our Into the Newsroom session about cross-platform content creation. With me today is Larry Nagengast from the Delaware Community Foundation. I'll turn it over to Larry, who will introduce our panelists, and we'll get started. Larry?
I'm here. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's kind of an interesting ride for all of us. Certainly, those of us who are on the panel. The digital media era has just brought great change. Once upon a time, print journalists were print journalists, broadcast journalists were broadcast journalists. Never the twain seemed to meet unless we were out at the same crime scene or a press conference, fighting to get the same story first. Our panelists today have experience working across multiple platforms, and I'm going to let them tell you what the secrets they are. So let me introduce them first. Mark Eichmann, Deputy Managing Editor of WHYY's Delaware desk. He's worked in radio for 20 years. And also as a TV producer and reporter for 10 years. Spends most of his days writing stories for FM and online, and also produces several TV specials on Delaware topics each year. Cris Barrish is a colleague of mine, former colleague of mine at the News Journal, where he spent more than 30 years, mostly as a senior investigative reporter. A couple of years ago, he went over to WHYY, where he works very closely with Mark. And Tom Byrne is someone I have worked with in my role freelancing for Delaware Public Media for the better part of the last 10 years. And Tom's an experienced journalist who's worked with WHYY and now Delaware Public Media. Julie Zeglen, Managing Editor of Technically, which is a digital publication covering tech and entrepreneurship in Delaware, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, and Pittsburgh. So she covers quite a bit of territory. She graduated from Temple, worked as the editor of Generosity, which is a Technically sister site covering social impact in Philadelphia. She's also been an editor of very hyper-local community news weekly. So we've got plenty of experience here, plenty of insights. And why don't let's go? Let me start with Tom. Tom Byrne, take it away. You go first, and then we'll move into Cris and Mark and Julian. All yours, Tom.
Sure. Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing that I work with on a daily basis is certainly Mark and Cris understand this as well, because they're working at WHYY, where there's a need for radio, and what their needs are. For us, it's newscast, our weekly show, The Green. They all have kind of needs in terms of content, and for us, that's our primary need. Then we've got to kind of marry that with what we're doing online and in the digital realm as well. And I think, for me, the biggest thing, I talk to our staff about, particularly some of our younger reporters, is, kind of being purposeful in what you're doing as you're covering a story, understanding, how to prioritize, but understand that a lot of these priorities do overlap. And so, particularly, when we talk about long form audio, which is what, is a big piece of what we want to do for our weekly show, The Green. Our reporters need to kind of go into a story understanding what they need, what voices they need audio-wise to make the story go, what we call scenes, places that you can go and get natural sound, or talk to a person who's one of your voices in a way that can help draw a listener into that place, give them a sense of being with you on the story when you're doing an audio piece. But a lot of those things can also, help you in terms of building the visual piece of it for the internet and for your web pieces. And so the biggest piece of advice I give my staff is, you want to be purposeful about finding those scenes first, and what can you do? Some stories have very natural scenes. For instance, we had a reporter who was just going to cover a daily news story at the Delaware State Fair last week, and while he was there, he spent some time talking to a bunch of FFA and 4-H kids who were working with their animals, getting ready to be judged and things like that. And, he's, found like, hey, this could be a really, good feature. And I'm here and I have the scene around me. I can get like really good material, natural sound of the state fair. I can get some of the people I'm talking to talk to me, not just in a pure interview fashion, but just kind of like walk me through what you're doing. So I could use that perhaps as a piece as well to draw people in, where it's not just a Q&A with that student. It's also them kind of just describing what they're doing. So people can feel like they're there. And at the same time, he's now understanding, hey, I've also got to get the visual element of this as well. So I've got this really great piece of audio. I got these great pieces of audio. I need to also make sure I get the visuals to go along with it, because while I'm really excited about my audio feature, I also want to make sure that I have those pieces for visuals as well. And that's a lot of, that was one where it kind of just came along as part of another story. What I tell them when they go out really working on a longer form story, to really think about where you're going, what you can do both visually and with audio, but at the same time, be open to what possibilities, like the reporter did at the state fair, kind of come upon you, like to really be aware. It's like in interviews. I mean, you go into interviews with a sense of what you want to ask and kind of the questions and topics you want to cover, but you've got to listen to make sure that you can follow up on things, or maybe something else comes out that's even better than what you thought. Same thing goes in terms of preparing yourself in terms of getting pieces for multimedia, that you may go in with an idea of what your scene's going to be, who you're going to talk to, what kind of natural sound you're going to get, what kind of pictures are possible, but really be aware while you're in the moment of what other things are out there and what other possibilities are out there. Because you may be surprised that sometimes if you let the game come to you a little bit, you find things even better than you thought in your preparation. So I talk a lot about that balance between being prepared and making sure you have a plan going in, but allowing yourself to find other things as you go along to help build the web piece in terms of the visuals that go with it, and maybe other pieces of audio that aren't part of your feature, but you can use as kind of little bonuses, either like a bonus interview or one of those scenes, if it turns out really well, can be a bonus scene audio within your web post. And for some of our reporters who are really adept with video, I mean, they can do that with video as well and create little videos that go into their web post as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Tom. Mark, tell me about your experience, and then we'll slide over to Chris and then Julie.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. I'll go back and just tell a little bit about my history. This is something Tom knows well, because we worked together when I first started in Wilmington back in 2000 at a little tiny station called WHYY, writing kind of 45-second maximum reports, which is a challenge to be sure, to be creative in 45 seconds and still find time to get in information is certainly a challenge. From there, I moved to WHYY in 2008, working as a producer, and then kind of learned the TV writing game kind of on the fly. And that's kind of a different animal, kind of like what Tom was talking about, the finding the visuals to set a scene and tell a story in a longer form. And now at WHYY, we're kind of doing a mix of radio, TV, and online, and the online portion of it is something that I've learned over the past 10 years is very different than writing a 45-second rap versus a 1,000, 2,000 word story is a very different experience, and a very different requires very different things when you're out gathering. Much to Tom's point about finding kind of those scenes, I think you said, Tom, the natural picture that you can paint word-wise. And so it's been an evolution for, I guess, all of us, but for me personally to develop those skills and find the right kind of method for doing that. So for me, I focus on web first, because Tom said sort of the FM priority, and I guess that's sort of the way it still is. It's almost dual priority. I know that's not priority isn't one thing, but I guess if you could have a dual priority, it's kind of both to have the web product and the radio both get all of your attention, which is sometimes hair pulling at times. Chris can tell you, right? But to find the best of what you've written for the web and translate that into radio is kind of the way that I work, and kind of a winnowing down of the best material. And the challenge always is to get radio copy together in a way that somebody hearing it for the first time gets it the first time they hear it, because there's no, unless you're listening to a podcast, there's no like rewind. Let me go back 15 seconds on air and hear what he say what I think I thought he said. So I think that's the challenge in writing for radio, is to write as clearly as possible and be creative, and use, the right words so the listener is, so it's a pleasant thing to listen to, but also is informative and memorable. So that's kind of the challenge I think that we all face. And it's just been it's been a fun ride working through the mediums, and I'm just happy to be here and good to see you all. Thank you.
Yeah, Cris, now you made the transition from the many years as a hard news reporter in the realm of print over into the broadcast world, and where you're doing primarily radio, but yeah, there's some television that goes into it as well. What was it like having to make that transition after spending so many years on the print side, and then having to learn all of those new talents that you're now using so well?
Well, I don't know whether I've really transitioned yet, but I'm trying. So I spent like 34 years at the newspaper doing everything from sports to politics, and for the last 20 years, investigative stories that could be a 5-day series or a series of stories over several months that I just focused on entirely. And I would decide what to write about. I'd spend as much time as I needed. I'd write 5,000 word articles with 3 sidebars of 1,200 words, and I'd have a photographer go with me. I'd have headline writers to do all the headlines, write the captions. My job was to focus on doing all the reporting, getting all the voices, covering all the angles, doing all the research, getting all the facts, so nothing would be wrong. So the newspaper business sort of cratered, and I left, I guess, 6 years ago, worked for a nonprofit briefly, and then I was going to be a teacher, and WHYY had a job as an education reporter, some for web, but mostly for this television show they had called First. So here I go in, I had to do an interview, and I was like, oh, I got this. And then they did a test, and all of a sudden, even like now, I'm worried about how my mouth looks and my hair, all kinds of stupid stuff. And I couldn't even read off the teleprompter because it goes vertical. So it's like, what the hell is this? And then as soon as we stopped the test, which I was terrible at, I started talking to Mark and Shirley, and they were like, oh yeah, now you're being yourself. So it's, I had to learn to try to be myself on air, but of course the best version of myself, because I could be pretty loose. So I spent a couple years learning how to do television packages, and then going on air to talk, intro the story and debrief the story. And I'd get on air. I like doing the packages. I mean, you go out with a camera guy, and they can help direct you. This will be a good visual, and then you write it, and then they would help put the package together. So that wasn't that hard, and I like that. But what was hard was like going on air and like reading off the teleprompter to introduce it, and then afterwards talk about it, because I would try to memorize it. So there's so much to learn beyond the actual reporting, but if you have the reporting skills, you can make it work. And that's what I think we did. So we would also translate some of our TV stories into radio for FM. They'd be features, maybe 5 minutes long, because some of the TV packages were 5 minutes long. But again, I usually had a camera guy to mix all the sound, and I would just take the audio from the TV package we did and then just recraft it. It would almost always be the same. So then we got rid of the TV show like about 2 years ago, and then it was just radio and an occasional documentary. And all of a sudden I had to learn how to mix the sound myself, and I was lost, man. And WHYY, they have all these experienced radio reporters, and Mark's out doing his story. So I literally, one of my pieces of advice for the interns and others is don't be afraid to ask for help, because I did not know how to mix sound. And I did not, it was different technology with Adobe Audition, and I'm having trouble just doing a basic 45-second rap and putting the bytes in. That's not easy. But then trying to mix sound. So I got help from another reporter up in Philadelphia, and then I had Mark to come over and here and show me all the time, and working all 4 tracks is tough. But now we're about 4.5 years into it, and I'm pretty comfortable doing it all. And I think Mark can attest, he doesn't have to hold my hand anymore. I don't have to go into the booth. But during the pandemic, we have a 3-person office in Delaware, and Mark and Zoe Reed decided to work from home. But I was panicked because I didn't want to try new technology on my home computer. It was Audacity. Is that what it is, Mark? Audacity. So I still came into the office where we have our studio to try to keep some things the same. So all I can tell you is that if you're going to be a reporter today, you're not going to have the luxury of what I had when I was in newsprint to take as much time as I wanted sometimes. You're going to have to do it all. You're going to have to take pictures. You're going to have to shoot videos sometimes. You're going to have to, you're going to have to distribute your story on 3 different mediums. And maybe a podcast, whatever. I mean, there's so much you have to do. But if you work at it and focus on it, you can do it. And after a while, it's like muscle memory. It's like throwing a baseball or any other activity that you do. If you paint or if you whatever, anything. It's almost just like washing dishes sometimes. After a while, you do it. But I'll find myself even yesterday toggling between a radio story and a web story. You have to go back and forth with 5 or 6 different programs, and you're not always familiar with them, and you're clicking at the bottom of your screen, and the wrong thing comes up, and oh my God, where was I? So, don't be afraid to be confused a little bit, but just always focus on getting that story out and keep the reader or the viewer or the listener in mind. And if you try to do that, you'll make it work. But it's not easy. But at the same time, as what I always say about journalism, it's not easy, but it beats work. So stay with it.
Julie, how about you? You've got primarily a website, web platform that you're dealing with, but obviously you've got a little bit of a print background behind that. Tell me about the platforms that you work on, and what some of the key issues and challenges you face are.
Sure. So, hi. Yes, I am Julie Zeglen, managing editor at Technically. I'm based in Philadelphia, but as mentioned, we have reporters based in Delaware, Baltimore, DC, and Pittsburgh, as well as Philly. So I started out interning at Philadelphia City Paper. My first job was editing a very small hyperlocal community news weekly in Philadelphia, and then moved over to the all digital Generosity publication based in Philly, and now I'm at Technically for the past 3 years or so. We are very niche and very unique in that we are entirely digital, but focus specifically on geographic communities focused within a specific industry. So that is technology, including entrepreneurs and other innovation-focused professionals. So our reporters are tasked with being experts on their beat, but also being community reporters. So in pre-pandemic times, that meant that we were always out at events. We were always hosting our own events. We host networking and jobs fairs. We are behind Philly Tech Week, which also includes a bunch of other markets as well. People from all over come to Philly Tech Week, but that event series is meant to be a sort of in-person, or this past 2 years, digital version of our reporting, like a live version of our reporting. And we think of that as a version of our journalism. It's us doing it in real time, in a way. We're conducting interviews, we're hosting panels, we're participating on panels. And that's just one example of a way that we are thinking about the interconnectedness of all of the ways that we communicate information. We also, in the past year and a half especially, we've been experimenting a lot with different platforms. So, our reporters have always found sources on social media, but we've also hosted a podcast on increasing diversity in venture capital investment. We recently have really been experimenting hard with Slack, which is a digital communication platform, something that we have used internally to communicate with our teams, especially virtually again. But we have a public Slack, which has over 3,000 members right now, mostly made up of our readers and different technologists from across our markets and the country. And we have literally this week moved our internal Slack communications to this public platform. And the point of that is that we're having basically out in the open conversations about the way that we do our journalism. So when I'm reaching out to the newsroom and suggesting story ideas, I'm doing it in a public channel. And the point there is, dropping the curtain, increasing media literacy rather, but also hopefully gathering some sources that way, because potentially a technologist based in Delaware might be watching us have that conversation, and they can say, like, I know somebody, or like, I could be a source, or I have thoughts on this, and that can help inform our reporting. And again, we think of that as a version of our journalism. That conversation on Slack might literally lead to inclusion in an article, but we've also conducted Slack AMAs. So that's something that's common on Reddit, but we have a channel on our public Slack where we'll do a live interview. For instance, we did one last week with basically about the career trajectory of a CTO based in Philly. And our Philly reporter asked all of her questions by typing them out live. He answered them live. She repackaged that live conversation into a Q&A that then lives on the website. We've also, I think right now, actually, our CEO is doing a live LinkedIn interview that he will then turn into, he'll basically summarize, he'll turn that into an edition of his weekly newsletter focused on HR professionals, which then we will repackage that newsletter into an article. So it's a lot of interconnectedness. In addition to publishing articles on our website, we also have a daily newsletter that goes out for each of our markets every day. And that includes everything that's been published on the site that day, as well as, a newsletter note from the local reporter or from me, the editor, basically encouraging responses to the articles or asking for perspectives on something that's a trend that we are looking to cover. And then if somebody responds to that email, maybe, we'll ask permission if we can include their response in a future article. So we're thinking a lot about how to increase engagement while also sourcing for these stories. And Julie, I guess the last, yep.
Yeah, you're describing probably a half dozen different tasks that you seem to have to work on just about every day. And I'm sure you don't work a 6-hour day, and I hope hope you're not working 14. But how when you've got all of these different tasks and all these things that have to get done pretty much every day, how do you manage your schedule on an hourly basis? I mean, is there something here? I always do this between 9 and 10 in the morning. Is this something that I do right after lunch? I mean, how do you do that and not avoid having 6 things crash into you at once, which I'm sure happens from time to time?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and something that I am actively working on myself, because it's easy to feel like you have to do everything all at once. It's easy enough with the newsletters. We have a preset schedule where they all go out at 5 p.m. every day. So reporters know that, if something's timely, if they have to get their stories in by a certain time. So that's not too new or innovative, but everyone has deadlines. But in terms of like Slack engagement, for instance, it's something that's kind of ongoing throughout the day. Maybe reporters, well, for one, we have like Slack channel community managers, which means that each reporter is in charge of moderating a specific channel. So our DC reporters in charge of the DC channel. They don't need to be actively looking at that or thinking about that for most of the day, but maybe like 2 or 3 times a day at different times. They'll just check in and like drop a link or ask a question or engage in some way. So that could maybe just be 20 minutes of your entire day, unless you want to use that time to more deeply engage and have a DM conversation with somebody that then replaces an interview you would do or something like that. We are trying to keep to a schedule. I mentioned the Slack AMAs, we're trying to do those weekly. So similarly, that would replace the time that a reporter would spend doing like a phone interview, for instance. Let's see, for things like our events, I mean, those are pretty well scheduled as well. I'll also note, so I as editor am in charge of shipping the newsletters, but for the reporters, for the most part, they are integrating their multi-platform audience engagement with their reporting in a way that it can sort of replace the more traditional methods, I suppose. And that kind of came out of necessity this past year because we can't go in person and we couldn't do interviews in person until very recently. We couldn't go to events. So that saved a lot of time and travel and things like that, but also we're not making those connections and we're not meeting the people who we should be writing for and about. So I guess it's the timing of it all has been a bit of an experiment as well, but blocking out specific time to do certain tasks is very helpful.
One of the things let me throw this out at all of you, and it's something that it still runs through my mind whenever I'm writing a story. It's the business of when you're writing for the web, of inserting links into your story. And a lot of times if I'm writing an education story, all of a sudden I've got this tendency to include a link to the homepage of every school district that's mentioned in the story. And I guess that may be a little bit excessive, but I mean, how do you decide, what you should not put into a story in terms of linking it to other content? Do you have your own guidelines here, or is it your own judgment? Because you don't want people to read your story and then go off somewhere else and not come back. Chris, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, you don't want to overwhelm the reader, so you don't want to overdo it. They're already, like, when they're reading a story online, the copies usually after 4 or 5 paragraphs, there's some kind of other insert in that takes their mind off. So you want to have a few judicious links that really reflect the story. Sometimes only one. Now, one rule of thumb I have is I'll put my previous stories on the topic in there so they get read because I'm proud of it, and I want people to read my stories. But just don't overdo it. I mean, people just they want to, if they call it a story, they want to read about it, and if they have interest in tangential to that, they'll find it on their own too. But it never hurts to just have if it's about vaccination, maybe include the state's website or another story you've done on vaccination, but just don't overdo it.
Which one are you? The one that we did a contract with?
Well, I can comment too.
You got your mic on, please. If you're not speaking, please mute
yourself.
Definitely love to link to our past reporting for further context. We'll also include links to things like, if we're referencing like a bill that recently passed, we'll link to the text of the bill. And I think of that as, it's a little bit of like, we're showing our work, but also the reader is interested in the bill because they're reading the story, and so they might want to dig a little bit deeper themselves. We do occasionally include, we include links to sometimes the websites of the companies that we're writing about, but that's especially if for instance, we're talking about a company that's hiring 400 technologists this month or something like that. Like we'll include a link in like a little parenthetical that's like, here, click here to see their open jobs, because potentially someone's reading that article because they saw the headline and they're interested in getting a job there. So we're just making it easier for them to get the information that they need.
Okay, so the important thing here is be judicious, don't overdo it. Yeah, Tom, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just want to kind of agree with what both Chris and Julie are saying, is that I think you want to be judicious. You don't want to overwhelm people, but you want to make sure. Yeah, I think certainly anything that you've kind of written previously on it that provides context that allows people to kind of see how the story has developed, that can help, because a lot of times when you're writing that story, you're going to kind of do a quick thumbnail sketch of what's gone before, but you want to give people that opportunity to go back and more fully understand where we've been to get to this point. But I think it also goes not just with links, but also I think with almost anything. There was a time, early on, in kind of the growing, web piece of thing, that people would just kind of throw whatever video they could put in, whatever like docs they could put in there, and so certainly like putting in, if you're writing about a court decision, having the actual decision in there is useful, but you don't need to throw every single thing in there, whether it be audio, whether it be video, whether it be links, whether it be, docs. You have to be judicious about it, because again, I think two things can happen. A, you can overwhelm people, and B, your post can get kind of just overwhelming visually for people, not just in terms of information. So you do want to try to make sure that what's there is important and it provides context, and perhaps, or in some cases, when I talk about kind of adding additional audio, it gives an added value to someone, that if they were reading a quote and you felt like, wow, this person had a lot of really good stuff to say, this is what I really needed to focus on for the story, here's maybe 2 minutes of audio that's digestible, that they can listen to get a little bit more from this person. And that's the other thing too, is I think making sure anything you put in there is digestible, is not, there's no point in putting, I mean, I remember people putting like whole press conferences on their websites. It's like, why? I mean, I don't want to be at the whole press conference. Why would someone else want to watch it? But those are the type of things that, really the only I think long form stuff that we generally put on our website would be like if we're doing like a debate, where you would give people the opportunity to watch a full debate. Or like, in the case, we did a story, Mark and I recently did the first edition of the Governor Carney call-in show. In that case, we put the whole show in at the end of the stories we did based on that call-in show, just to give people another opportunity if they didn't have a chance to hear it live and in person to go do it. But again, it's always just being judicious and thoughtful, trying to give people more, but not overwhelm them or put things in there that are just in a lot of ways just extraneous.
Mark, go ahead.
And then I would just add to all those great points that maybe 10 years ago this wouldn't have been the case, but the way things are now, we are not afraid to put in a link to somebody else's story, right? And certainly we'll put in links to what Chris has done on this story before in one of his stories, but later on, if there's an angle or a subject that, say, the News Journal or somebody at Delaware Public Media technically has covered that would further explain this graph better, we're not afraid to link out to that, just because it serves the reader. And I think that's sort of the way we've developed, whereas maybe 10 years ago, that wasn't the case maybe at WHYY, that it would have been more competitive. It just serves the reader better to know this, and we haven't written about that, but Sophia or somebody at Delaware Public Media has. We're not afraid to link out to that, and it just serves the reader. So that's.
And honestly, Mark, go ahead, Chris.
We can bill them afterwards, right?
Yeah, but it's true. But it's also, to be quite honest with you, like just a realization that because the business has shrunk so much, that it's unrealistic to think that anybody's outfit is going to cover everything completely. That so there's always going to be somebody who's probably doing more, better even reporting than you, because that's what they chose to focus on, and you may have had a different priority at that time. But it does, as Mark said, it serves the reader to hear it all, to see it all. And I do think ultimately people do appreciate that. And for whatever web traffic you're sending somebody else's way, people, I do think, remember that you kind of help them find more information, and so it builds for you a trust with your audience.
It makes you a more reliable source, a place where more people hopefully will want to go, because they can get broader information than they might ordinarily anticipate. So, okay. Any other key points that folks would like to add before we open it up to questions? Go ahead, Chris.
One thing I learned writing for radio is that you want to minimize the amount of numbers you put in a story. You don't want to put a bunch of, you don't want to say there were 400 cases yesterday. That's an 18% decrease from, and then there's 38 hospitals. You want to try to minimize the numbers, because the listener is just driving around in their car or sitting at home, and they don't have time to put all that together.
Yeah, they're trying to do the math.
Yeah, you don't want them to do the math. You want them to swim along with you, not try to catch up. So just, use numbers again, judiciously, just to make your biggest point. And a lot of times I'll write a web story and then go to translate it to radio. And it's I'm not including all that stuff. Don't say 98.9%, say 99%, 99 out of 100. So that's just a little tip for some of the people working with newspaper websites out there.
I think it's time for us to open this up to our folks in the audience. Do any of our listeners have any questions? And I'll let Rebecca can probably monitor this a little faster than I can. So yeah, okay, John Flaherty, I see your hand up. Unmute and speak up, John.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. About 10 years ago, I went to a meeting of the Family Law Commission where somebody had a camera and was videoing the proceedings. And the chairman of that commission told that person to stop using the camera, and they didn't. And the Capitol Police were called in and they were ejected from the meeting. Does this kind of situation happen to you guys? Or what other obstacles do you face when you're dealing with, public officials up and down Delaware?
Good question. I got a feeling that Chris has a good answer for this. Go ahead.
I have a funny story, but I wish you'd turn the mic off, but I'll say it anyway. So, I don't know, the courts reopened in Delaware about a month ago or so. So I was like, let me go out and chronicle that. So I went and watched the first trial in action in jury selection. And I had my phone with me, because you can take your phone into the courthouse if you're a reporter. And I interviewed, and I had done a year ago, the head of the prison system had done a news conference right in the hallway of the courthouse outside a courtroom after, I think, the prison riot trial. So we interviewed him there and took some pictures. So I took a picture of the prosecutor talking to a police officer with their permission, and of the defense attorney and of some law intern in the hallways of the courthouse. So published the story, went through, no problem. Then I got a call from a friend, former colleague that works for the court system, all angry. Oh, you violated the rules, and you know the rules, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what are you talking about? I said, what do you mean? I've published photos from the hallway. We didn't take a camera into the courtroom. We didn't run a recorder in the courtroom. I didn't tweet from the courtroom. And they wanted us to take it down because some of the judges might get upset. And I said, no, we're not going to take it down. They said, we might pull your pass. I said, well, pull my pass. Now I won't go in again and do that, but it's just the kind of petty stuff you have to deal with. And it happens, you get used to it, but this one sort of threw me for a loop. But that's just an example. But filming stuff in public, Only in the courthouse is where you're really not, it's not permitted and you'd get in trouble. So anybody else talk about their obstacles? Mark, Tom?
Yeah, I think, I do think, 10 years ago, that was definitely, there was still this kind of feeling that these meetings were like closed off places that you couldn't do things. I think now most places understand that, that genie's out of the bottle. I mean, people are live tweeting what you're saying, and, and the difference between someone live tweeting and videoing you is, in effect, none. I mean, the people are hearing and seeing what you're saying. But there are, I mean, like the courts, I think even, the legislature still lags behind in terms of, truly understanding, that, again, the genie's out of the bottle. So this idea that you can only record certain things, or, I know there's, still a lot of, hemming and hawing about, allowing, live streaming from committee meetings in the caucus room at the General Assembly, because we put the cameras in, someone could turn them on while we're having a private caucus meeting. I mean, at some point they're all going to realize, you're fighting against the current. But I think you still run into some of these things, but it tends to be, I feel, those who are used to the old way, who are just having problems catching up with what the reality on the ground is now.
And you also, like members of the public, you don't want to invade their privacy by shooting live video of them. I interviewed some people at a soup kitchen the other day. There was a vaccination event around the corner, and they were trying to get people to go there. So I took some photos, and I said, "Look, does anybody mind being in the photo?" If they raised their hand, I wouldn't have taken their photo. So I think you have to be more sensitive to members of the general public than politicians. There were a couple of years ago, the legislature didn't finish until 8 a.m. It was the first time my whole life I had to get sent out to cover the last day of the legislature.
Lucky you.
Mark.
And last,
Mark,
I've heard.
yeah,
I heard it was going to be his last.
So it was like, it went on till 8 a.m. So we had a cameraman in there, and we're filming for our TV piece, but I'm also have to write a web story. And in the middle of the night, there was one of the Republican lawmakers, and it was a little bit, we're in the House of Representatives, and one of the Republican older representatives was just zonked out, totally zonked out. So I said, this is a picture that will illustrate the problem with staying up all night to try to pass legislation. So I took a photo, and we used it, but literally a couple other members of the GOP caucus came over and tried to berate me for, did you just take a photo of him sleeping? I said, of course I did. Yeah, you saw me take the photo. I mean, of course I took the, well, that's so disrespectful. I said, no, it's not. It captures the story that I'm going to be writing about. And, that kind of like, that could scare off a younger, less experienced, maybe timid reporter. But don't cower to politicians. I mean, you're there to serve the reader, the viewer, the listener. I mean, you don't want to be a complete asshole, but still, just don't cower and find the pictures that illustrate your story, and don't be afraid to put public officials on the spot.
Yeah, well, Tom, you had an incident a couple of weeks ago with where one of your reporters got a picture of a sleeping lobbyist, a very prominent lobbyist in the General Assembly, and I saw that posted online. Were there any repercussions from that one?
No, I mean, again, and this is the thing, is like, things that, and that was something we didn't use in a story. It was just a social media, I shouldn't say just a social media post, but it was a social media post. And that's the thing, people have to understand nowadays, and it's not just journalists. I mean, the public is taking pictures and tweeting them. And so this idea that that they can control these things is just, it's ridiculous. But I did want to mention the other thing, Cris was talking about, showing respect for, people in the public. The other thing is schools too. We do very much pay attention to what school rules are about taking, when we go into classrooms to do stories about taking pictures of kids. And, there's ways around that. There's ways of, making sure you can kind of get the backs of heads and distant shots where nobody's identifiable, but it just requires working with those people. And that's somewhere where you definitely, want to pay attention and work with, whoever you're working with.
And that's something you want to sort of take care of on the front end, because
Yes.
most schools have kids sign. And I did education reporting for like a year and a half at the show, and we're out filming in class. But almost every school or daycare or whatever has parents, kids sign an agreement whether they can be used in video. So just let them know you're going to be coming. If there's any children that have not signed that waiver, make sure they're not there, or get them out of the room. So you're not like your camera guy, or when you're taking a picture, you're not worried that I've got 8 kids in this photo. Are they all okay? So try to get that taken care of on the front end to make your job go a little bit easier when you're out there trying to learn, rather than, okay, which one isn't allowed,
Yeah, it's really bad when you got that shot, a great shot with 8 kids in the picture, and the one that you can't use is right there in the middle, blowing the whole thing. You can't crop it out on either side. So, yeah. Julie, you're in I guess a little bit of a different situation in terms of this public access and the use of cameras. Have any of these things cropped up in your work with technical?
I can't think of a great example for you. So,
okay.
And I'm sure that it has, but yeah.
Don't you have like businesses that try to control who you photo and how you portray them, and you have to, like, we're only going to ask I can imagine you have public affairs people saying we don't we want your questions in advance and all. Do you have to deal with that kind of crap?
True. Yeah. I was thinking in terms of the video, audio, which we don't do much of, but yeah, an example. I mean, we cover GoPuff a ton in Philly, which has raised literally billions of dollars. They're based in the Callie Hill neighborhood of Philadelphia. So we've covered them from startup phase now to growth company phase. And eventually I'm sure they'll go public, but they do not make their senior level staffers available for conversations with us when we go through the communications people. So it's kind of an ongoing challenge for us to write around that, but a version of that, an example of our Slack AMA, actually recently we talked to their former VP of engineering, and the whole conversation wasn't focused on GoPuff, but he did give us a lot of insight on what it was like to work there when they were in such an intense growth phase. So I mean, for us, oftentimes it's, if we have a challenging, like a gatekeeper in a PR person, we will try to find people through different means. We'll find people who work for the company on LinkedIn or social media or wherever. And sometimes it's just on background to start, but then at least we have some information that we can then go to the communications person and say, listen, like, we're talking to your employees. It's in your best interest for you to connect us to the CEO if it is a challenging story or something like that. So yeah, we have to get creative, but a version of that is using different media to connect with sources.
Okay, we're close to the witching minute here. Any other questions out there, and if not, Rebecca and I will wrap it up. Any other hands up anywhere? Seeing none.
Give us some questions.
Chris is the answer man. All right. Okay. Hey guys. Thank you all for attending. We have 2 more sessions in this series lined up. Rebecca has one next week. So Rebecca, why don't you talk about what you're doing for next week, and then I'll tell them what we have for 2 weeks down the road, and we can then all wave goodbye. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Sure. Well, and thank you so much to our panel. I think what we're hearing is that, it all kind of knits together in a way that journalism is still a vital resource and so critical. And if we get too caught up in the format, we sometimes lose sight of what's really important, which is sharing information out to the public and shining light where it should be shown. So to that end, our next session is using public records in reporting, and Danielle Ohl of the Capital Gazette is going to share her expertise because it is harder. Julie earlier was talking about how difficult it can be sometimes when you only get funneled to the PR people. So public records are like the quintessential primary source documents, and Danielle will tell us a little bit more about how she uses them and what are the most effective ways to gain access. So that'll be August 3rd at 9:30, and then Larry's going to finish up his series August 11th with the next
Right.
generation of journalism. So.
Right. We'll be talking. I've got two of my three panelists lined up. I will have Nancy Karabjanian from the University of Delaware, former anchor at WHYY, and also involved in the creation of Delaware Public Media. She can, give that the university perspective of where she sees the journalism profession going. Also have Tim Furlong from Channel 10 in Philadelphia, who is kind of a one-man operation, trying to cover the entire state of Delaware for a network broadcast outlet in Philadelphia. He's going to talk about his work, and I'm going to bring in someone else. I've not confirmed the third person to talk about the future of collaborative journalism and I know we've got a collaborative effort underway in Philadelphia, and we're talking about one in Delaware. So we're going to bring all those pieces together 2 weeks from today on August 11th. So that'll be a nice way for us to wrap up this summer program. So that's all I've got to say. Rebecca, do you have anything else?
No, that's it for me. This session is, as I mentioned, recorded. It'll be on the MDDC YouTube channel, and it will also be highlighted in our Friday planner, which comes out obviously on Friday. If you want to sign up for that or find out anything else about what the Press Association is doing in Maryland, Delaware, and DC, you can go to our website, which is mddcpress.com. So thank you all so much. Go off and commit wonderful journalism. So thank you.
Thanks for